It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on back in to another podcast by George. Well, it's coronavirus 2020. It continues here in the heartland in the state of Iowa. It is unrelenting. We are hitting peaks, highs of infections, the highest that we've had in 5 months. I wanted to read this piece to kind of get us started here very quickly before we get to our guest. Another 15 people with COVID-19 have died in the state of Iowa. There have been an additional 919 confirmed cases the state of Iowa reported today. At 10 o'clock this morning, the state was reporting 1,414 COVID-19 related deaths, an increase of 15 since the state's tally at 10 a.m. Tuesday. Now, the state was reporting at 10 a.m. This morning there are 94,342 confirmed cases of coronavirus, an increase of 919 since yesterday. And yesterday was actually a low count day, so the counts go up and down. But, you know, the long story here, the short story is that it's getting worse. The fall and the winter is upon us. Everybody said that the infections would get worse. We were going to have to rely on our own common sense to social distance, wear masks, wash hands, do all those types of things. The President of the United States is our leader. He has no sense. It doesn't look like that we're going to be able to do these things. And man, I'm telling you, I'm keeping my fingers and toes crossed for a vaccine because, you know, I want to get back out there. I've been staying home. I mean, my wife and I both have. And I want to play hockey. I mean, that's my passion. That's what I do as an old guy here in retirement. I want to get back on the ice. And winter's upon us and probably isn't going to happen this year, but I'm hoping maybe next spring. And I just wanted to get an update on all of that with our guest today, and I'm very happy to have him from Seattle. It's Dr. Jim Kublin. He's the Executive Director of the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, and most importantly for today's discussion, he's the Executive Director of the Operations Program for COVID-19 Prevention Network. Doctor, welcome to a podcast by George.
Thanks so much, George. Thanks for the invitation, and glad I can contribute to this discussion and reach some of your listeners out there in Iowa.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, the vaccine, a lot of people are saying they're afraid to take it even when it comes out, let alone volunteer to get it developed. And, you know, we have some discussion on the podcast. Our good friend, Dr. Andrew Nish at John Stoddard here in Des Moines has talked about kind of the timetable. He says, yeah, I mean, they may get a vaccine relatively soon, but it's got to be distributed. I mean, that's a major problem. And of course, even before that happens, we've got to have these trials, these tests. Tell us about the process.
Sure. You know, we are moving at a very accelerated pace, but we are not cutting any corners with regard to confirming, you know, that these are safe and that ultimately are proven to be effective. And we're able to do that, you know, in this rapid timeline because of the enormous resources that are being applied to it. And I'd say, you know, please go to preventcovid.org. That's our website in which a lot of the details of the information on the different phases of clinical trial testing are provided on that website, as well as the opportunity to register into our national database. We now have over 400,000 people who have completed registration in this database to participate in these clinical trials, but we literally need millions of people who step up. And, you know, we think it really is a civic duty and responsibility for you all to contribute as meaningfully as possible as you see fit. And so for these clinical trials, we typically, you know, there's a lot of preclinical studies that go on in the test tube and in preclinical testing to ensure that there is a sufficient safety bar to move forward into the first phase of clinical testing, what we call phase one. That's usually in 10, 20, 30, 40 people. And then there's another evaluation and confirmation of sufficient safety to move into hundreds of people. That's usually phase two. And then sufficient safety assessments to confirm that we can then move into thousands of people, which is moving into phase 2B or phase 3. Then we expanded into tens of thousands of people for the large phase 3 efficacy trials. And that's where we are today. We have 3 efficacy trials currently underway. That's with Moderna, AstraZeneca, and the Janssen J&J products. And then we're anticipating starting two more of these phase 3 efficacy trials in the next couple months with Novavax and Sanofi. And this pipeline of products is really unprecedented. They're all using a similar, what we call immunogen, it's the spike protein of the envelope on the surface of this virus. So we're quite confident that one of these will work. They're using different platforms, different types of ways of delivering this spike protein. You can't get the infection from the vaccine. Again, because these now are in tens of thousands of people, they have met a very high safety threshold, that so far looks to be quite solid. And we're excited about now measuring the efficacy of these vaccines so that they can be deployed. People like yourself can get back to normal and playing hockey.
Well, I think that's the key point, because you need volunteers, obviously. I mean, do you have enough people to do what you need to do right now? I mean, is there a big push and a drive to get lots more people?
There is a big push and a drive. We need, so many more people to step up. As I mentioned, we have over 420,000 people in the registry who have completed that as of today. But we literally need millions of people that we can reach out to participate in these phase 3 clinical trials.
And as you mentioned, I think my main concern would be safety. I mean, is this safe for me? Well, you've got a precedent here. You've got tens of thousands of people that have taken these vaccines. They're okay. So nothing's a sure thing. I mean, we're talking statistics here, but it's likely that it's going to be safe for people to do this.
It really is. It's likely to be safe, and it's likely, there's a high probability of success that these will be efficacious. And, these efficacy trials are double blind. The participants nor the investigators and doctors know whether or not you receive the vaccine or placebo. Most of them are 1-to-1. So, you have a 50% chance of getting the vaccine when you enter these studies. And then we follow, 40,000 people who have been enrolled in the studies for several months and count the number of cases that occur overall in the study. And then the unblinded statisticians look at the vaccine and count the number of moderate to severe cases in the vaccine arm, and then count the cases in the placebo. And hopefully we'll see a big delta between those two. Many more cases in the placebo versus the vaccine would confirm that the vaccine is really having a significant impact and could then really contribute to the nation's public health if we are then able to deploy them across the country.
And, I mentioned a little bit of your background, and this isn't your first rodeo. Not only have you been immersed in this, but you've been involved in the development of other vaccines. Now, one thing about coronavirus, just because of this media world that we live in, people are scared to death of this thing. I mean, is there any greater risk associated with being a volunteer for this vaccine than other vaccines you've worked with?
No, we haven't seen any signals of real concerning safety problems. It's also notable to recognize that one of the studies has been paused because there was a safety signal. So
I heard about that.
Monitoring safety is working. The system is in place. No further injections are being given into that study until the FDA does its thorough review. We do expect them to lift the pause on that study, and it will likely be completed. Tens of thousands of people have been injected with that vaccine outside of the U.S., and it's been tested thoroughly in Brazil, South Africa, and in the UK. It was originally developed by investigators at Oxford University. When you enroll 10,000, 20, 30, 40,000 people into these large efficacy trials, and, we want to make sure it's working in the elderly. So many of these people who are participating are over the age of 65. They're naturally going to see adverse events occur in these clinical trials. People will even, likely die in these clinical trials, but that doesn't mean that it's associated or a result of the vaccine. It's the old correlation is not causation. Right. So, messaging around this, I think, is particularly important. I'd say, the lay press and the journalism sometimes does a good job, but also is sometimes, pursuing their top story more than necessarily the accuracy of that story. And I think I appreciate your effort here, George, to get this message out regarding the importance of participating in these clinical trials. Again, preventcovid.org is where a lot of information can be found. We have an FAQ page there that my wife claims is world class. So I trust her.
Well, I'm going to show that. I'm going to super the URL that you're talking about. And folks, he's got to go because he's busy and you want him to be busy. Let me close with this question. I want to put it back in my context for my viewers. I'm wanting to get back out on the ice. I'm wanting to do it this winter. Let's say I volunteer for this vaccine. As we mentioned, it's not going to be distributed or available out there maybe till this spring, next summer, hell, maybe next year, later next year. If I volunteer for to test the vaccine, will I be green lighted, so to speak, sooner than other people because I volunteered?
That's a very good question, George. And we do have a commitment to make sure that if you receive the placebo and you're a participant in one of these vaccine clinical trials, you will be offered the vaccine. And so, the people who participate in these clinical trials, it requires a commitment. You have to go into the clinic several times. And of course, if you have any symptoms, we're carefully monitoring that. They'll test you for COVID. I think it is a way of getting prioritized for these vaccines. If you're in the 50% who hasn't received the vaccine and you receive placebo, there is a commitment by these companies and by us to make sure that the placebo recipients receive the vaccines. So it really is. I think we also have developed some campaign material, and Harrison Ford put in his voice to one of our campaigns. And it's a very moving campaign.
We need to register 1 million more volunteers to complete the studies and possibly get a safe and effective vaccine to hundreds of millions of Americans.
If we want to go back to work, if we want our kids to be in school, if we want our economy to thrive, every day sooner these trials are done means a day sooner we have a vaccine.
In your hands will rest the final success or failure of our course. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The vaccine trial needs Americans of every race, location, and medical condition to help in one of the most important endeavors of our lifetime. Go to preventcovid.org to be a part and help our great nation.
Of the 400,000 people in the registry today, we've had several thousand of them send in video testimonials as to why they're participating. And really, a lot of it is a patriotic duty to seeing this country contribute to the fight against this COVID. And I hold that very dear to my heart as well. We're working 24/7 and are very driven to bring this country back on its feet 100%.
Well, these folks, I'm sure you would agree, the volunteers in particular, they're heroes, folks. I mean, they're going that extra mile to make us safe, all the rest of us. And myself, I've got my vested interest to get back out there. So if you're going buggy, jumping out of your skin to get back in circulation, you can participate in this. Look at that URL that's going across the screen and be an American hero. You don't get many opportunities like that. That's great. And man, these folks are needed. So, Doc, again, appreciate you coming on Podcast by George. I know you got to run. Anything you want to say in closing that I didn't ask about, or something that you want to reemphasize here before we leave?
Well, simply that I think, for your listeners, I hope you're all staying healthy and well and safe. For those of you who, need to get out into the community because of work or social activities, I think that does place you at potential risk. And therefore, you're an ideal candidate for these phase 3 efficacy trials, and hope you consider joining us at preventcovid.org. Thanks very much.
That's great. Folks, that's Dr. Jim Kublin. He's the Executive Director, Operations Program for COVID-19, the Prevention Network. You've seen the URL. I've got that information up on the screen. Visit their websites and check out Harrison Ford, if nothing else. And consider being a volunteer. That's going to wrap it up, folks. That's going to do it for today. That's, as I say, that's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.